There comes a time in life when you're no longer afraid of death. You're just afraid of having to keep living in a house that's becoming too much, too many things, too many memories, and too many pieces of your life you no longer have the strength to hold on to. So, how did a 74-year-old woman in just 48 hours clear out a 3-bedroom house after over 40 years of living there with her husband and children, no professionals, no kids, around to help, just herself, and 7 bold decisions, 7 decluttering? Choices that felt ruthless, but brought her freedom. And you know what? Anyone over 60, even if you're tired, even if you're living alone, even if you don't know where to start, I could do it too. Margaret was the one who made me realize that morning she stood still in her living room holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. Her husband had passed 3 years ago. Her children lived far away. The house was now just her and a mountain of belongings weighing on both her body and her memories. Every chair, every lamp, every coat in the closet seemed to ask, if you get rid of me, are you throwing away part of your life? The struggle wasn't with the objects themselves, it was the emotional tug-of-war that came every time she had to decide to keep or to let go. And the older we get, the harder that choice becomes, more exhausting, more painful, more tangled with guilt. Margaret knew deep down she couldn't keep living among things she never used. She couldn't keep cleaning what was already broken, worn, or falling apart. She couldn't keep clinging to the past at the cost of her peace in the present. But letting go, that wasn't easy either. 48 hours before the moving day, Margaret made her decision. No more waiting, no more regret. She would clear out not just the house, but her life, not with muscle, but with clarity, with 7 rules she called the honest choices for living the rest of life lightly. And that changed everything. You know, if you've ever stood in your own home, looked around, and felt tired, not because there's too much to clean, but because you don't even know what to let go of. If you've ever felt trapped between memories, between belongings of loved ones who've passed, between things you might need someday, but haven't touched in years, then you're not alone. Margaret felt that way too, and she found her way through it. What about you? Is there something in your home you're holding on, and not because you need it, but because you just haven't been ready to let it go? A shirt you never wear, a wobbly old chair, a box of faded letters? Share it in the comments below, because sometimes saying it out loud is the first step to letting go. And then, after folding up the last photo of her late husband, Margaret stood up. She didn't cry. She just sighed very softly, like the breath of acceptance. She picked up a trash bag, walked toward the kitchen, and began to clean, not because the house was dirty, but because she wanted to cleanse a life that had been filled with too many long-held attachments. Not everything we keep in a house is something we still need. Some things sit on shelves for decades. No one touches them. No one even remembers why they're still there. And yet when someone suggests throwing them away, our heart aches. Margaret felt that too, even with a vase that no one ever put flowers in. Margaret once had a gray blue porcelain vase. Not beautiful, not ugly, just something she had received at an office party back in '89 from a co-worker who had long since passed away. That vase was never used for flowers. It sat quietly on the wooden cabinet in the living room, like part of the wall, as if it didn't truly exist. But one day, when Margaret's daughter asked Mom, "Do you want me to take this vase away?" Margaret froze, because suddenly that vase felt like it stood for a time, long gone a time, when she still went to work, still had coworkers, still shared stories during lunch breaks. To throw it away would mean admitting she was no longer that person anymore, keeping things just because. And the silent cost, no one says it out loud, but it's often those just because items that make older people feel drained because they take up space from things we truly need. They slow down every organizing effort. They make us feel guilty each time we see them, but never guilty enough to throw them out. A mismatched set of glasses, kept only because you remember the trip you bought them, on a heavy wooden chair no one ever sits on anymore, but you don't dare give it away because Dad bought it for the future. A coffee grinder never once used. A children's night lamp broken for years, but still sitting there. Margaret's tip number 1: start where there are the fewest emotions. Don't touch memories, first begin decluttering in areas with the least emotional attachment. The medicine cabinet, old paperwork, drawers, a box of dead batteries, or expired food. These places won't make you hesitate, and they help you avoid an emotional shutdown. At the very first step, Margaret started with the kitchen drawer. Within 15 minutes, she found expired spices from 2017, a moldy box of tea, some cracked plastic containers, dried up rubber bands, and leaking old batteries. None of those things made her pause. No stories, no memories. Just simple choices, keep or toss, that was enough to make her feel lighter. Because when you're not ready to face the past, start with the present, declutter the simple things. To build momentum one step at a time, you don't need to untangle the past all at once. No one begins by clearing the heart. Start with the shelf where your emotions no longer live. Margaret's tip number 2, label by priority, not by guilt. Sort your items into 4 categories: used, often used, sometimes not used, but still like. No clear reason to keep. Margaret didn't begin by throwing things away. She started by seeing clearly, not just with her eyes, but with honesty toward herself. One Saturday afternoon, she held a small stack of sticky notes. Each one is palm-sized. Each color has a different meaning. She walked through every room in her home, stopped in front of every item. No judgment, just a label based on actual use. Blue, used, often. Yellow, used, sometimes. Orange, not used, but still liked. Gray, no clear reason why it's still here. No need to decide anything yet, just a step back to see what her home had been holding. The electric kettle, used every morning. Got a blue label. The dish set from her daughter's wedding. Yellow, a handbag she'd never used. Orange, a box of cords and cables she couldn't identify. Gray, at first Margaret didn't throw anything out. She just let everything speak its place in her life. And a few days later she looked again, every item with a gray label she hadn't touched even once. That's when she knew she was ready to let go. Labeling wasn't just about organizing stuff, it was about organizing the heart. So you no longer keep things just because. So you no longer carry regret for items that no longer serve your life today. And so you no longer stay trapped in a version of yourself you've long since outgrown. Some things in your home you never touch, not because you've forgotten, but because you remember too clearly. It could be a sweater her late husband used to wear, a box of old letters, or a drawer full of family photos mixed with joy and grief. Margaret called them memory doors that weren't ready to be opened. Every time she stood before them, she heard a quiet question rise from within: am I ready to keep living without clinging to these things? Margaret's tip number 3, limit memories. Keep only what truly represents the person you loved. When it comes to sentimental items, you don't have to keep everything. Select 5-10 pieces that genuinely hold meaning. Wrap the rest in gratitude and gently let go. Margaret once had 17 photo albums. They held wedding photos, childhood pictures, blurry vacation shots, and group photos she couldn't even recall taking one day. She opened album number 12 and realized she couldn't remember the names of more than half the people in the pictures. So she picked the 3 most beautiful albums. She chose photos that truly made her smile. She created a new collection, smaller, simpler, but full of life. As for the rest, she placed each photo down, whispered a thank you, and put them in a donation box. These memories have lived fully inside me. Now I need space to keep living forward. With letters, she kept handwritten notes from her husband and a few lines her daughter wrote in 5th grade. The rest she took photos, saved them on her computer, and burned the paper copies. She said, I'm not burning the memories, I'm burning the weight I feel every time I stumble upon them. No one says you have to throw everything away, but if you do choose to keep something, keep it willingly, not out of guilt, not out of fear you'll forget someone who's gone, because real memory doesn't live in the object, it lives in the way you carry each day with gratitude for what's been. Do you have something you've never dared to open because you know you'll cry? An old letter, shirt, a box of photos? Share it in the comments. You might not be the only one. Margaret chose to keep one photo frame, not because it was beautiful, but because in that photo he was looking at her with a smile that was truly his. As for the rest of the frames, she let them go so the room wouldn't stay a museum of what once was, but could become a space for what's still to come. Some accidents don't come from big things, they come from a rug that's slightly out of place, a staircase without a handrail, or an old object sitting in the wrong spot at the wrong time. Margaret once slipped in the bathroom. She didn't break any bones, but ever since she never felt confident walking across a threshold again. It wasn't just the floor, she said, it's because I'm not who I used to be. Margaret's tip number 4, eliminate danger before you start decluttering. Don't just think about cleaning, think about safety before organizing anything. Scan your home for hazards and take care of them right away. She started by walking through each room, carrying a small checklist. Is there anything blocking the walking path? Are there tangled cords under the desk? Are there rugs that slip too easily? Are there items stored too high where I have to stretch to reach them? Is the lighting bright enough? Do I have proper handrails in the bathroom? In just one afternoon, she cut unnecessary cords, short or tied up outlets with cable ties, removed 2 old slippery rugs, got rid of tall book chair she never dared to climb. She said, "I don't need a home that looks like a magazine. I need a home where I'm not afraid to walk alone at night." Many older adults don't like changing things in their homes, but sometimes familiarity is the very thing that becomes a hidden risk. A cozy corner where you used to drink tea can become a fall risk if the lighting isn't right. A sentimental wooden table can turn into an obstacle each time you get up at night to use the bathroom. You don't have to throw everything away sometimes. It's just about rearranging, shifting things slightly. So you can feel still my home, but now it's a safer version. Is there a spot in your home that could be dangerous, but you've been ignoring it? A slippery rug, a staircase without a handrail, a dim light bulb you haven't replaced? Leave a comment below to remind each other. Decluttering is also about making your home safe for yourself. Margaret replaced all the hallway bulbs with motion sensor lights. Just a small change, but it gave her so much peace each time she woke up at night. She said safety isn't just about not falling, it's about not feeling afraid when you're alone. There are things we no longer use, but we still keep them because they once belonged to an older version of ourselves. A suit from your working days, a sewing machine from when your hands were still steady, a suitcase that traveled across half the country with you. Margaret had kept her old nurse uniform, even though she had retired more than 10 years ago, even though her hands were no longer steady enough to give anyone a shot. But every time she saw that uniform, she remembered the eyes of her former patients and the feeling of being called Nurse Margaret, someone who had made a difference. Margaret's tip number 5, keep the self, not the title. Keep only what reminds you of who you are, not just what you used to do. Every object has its purpose, but not every purpose still fits who you are today. She reorganized her wardrobe and set aside 3 things that still made her feel like herself: a simple white blouse, a silver syringe, a retirement gift, and 1 photo with her closest colleagues. The rest, the uniforms, the certificates, the awards. She wrapped it carefully and sent it to a nursing school. I don't need to keep what once made others admire me. I only need to keep what helps me still respect myself. Some items make us proud, and others keep us stuck in the past. It's not always easy to tell the difference, but if an item only brings up regret, resentment, or the feeling of I used to be someone else, then maybe it's time to let it go. Not because we're forgetting that part of life, but because we're clearing space to live the next part fully. Are you still holding on to something just because I used to be? An old work outfit, a staff badge, a desk from a job long gone. Take a moment, look at that item. Ask yourself, is it helping you move forward or holding you back? Share in the comments. You might not be the only one carrying the same weight. That afternoon, Margaret folded up her last award certificate, placed in a box, and smiled softly. Nurse Margaret did her part. Now it's Grandma Margaret's turn to learn painting, to grow flowers, and to sleep in. Every morning, there's a kind of object that doesn't belong to us, not because it's not in our house, but because we're only holding onto it to make someone else happy. A chair her husband used to love, a pile of trophies from her son's elementary school days, a cabinet of toys, just in case the grandkids visit someday. Margaret had an old piano, dusty, no one played it anymore. But every time she thought of giving it away, she paused. What if my grandson comes home someday and wants to learn the truth? Is that grandson was away at college in another state and hadn't visited in a year. Margaret's tip 6, free yourself from expectations by asking, who needs this? For every item, ask yourself, am I keeping this for me or for someone who's no longer here? If the object is only holding the place of a promise never fulfilled, maybe it's time to return it to where it truly belongs. Margaret wrote little notes and stuck them onto the items. She was unsure about my husband's. He's gone. My child's. He has his own home now. My grandchild's, who no longer comes home. And then she asked herself, if I died tomorrow, would any of these people want to keep these things? The answer was almost always no. Some items, when you keep them for someone else, you think it's out of love, but sometimes it's just because you're not ready to let go of a connection that's already grown distant. Keeping an object won't make someone remember you. It only keeps you stuck in a role that no longer fits. Is there something in your home that you're holding on to just because you think someone might need this later? An old bicycle, a stack of textbooks, a dusty box of toys. Are you sure? Do they need it, or are you just holding space for a role they've already forgotten? Comment below and ask yourself, who am I keeping this for? That afternoon, Margaret gave away the old piano, the one no one played. The girl who came to pick it up had just lost her mother. She wanted to learn piano to feel close to her again. Margaret watched the young woman walk away, then whispered, maybe the piano wasn't meant to wait for my grandson. Maybe it needs to go where someone truly wants to play. Not everyone can declutter an entire house in 2 days. Margaret didn't plan to until time forced her to begin, but once she finished, she realized if I could change everything in just 48 hours, maybe it would have been much easier if I'd started a little earlier. Margaret's tip number 7, just 15 minutes a day. You don't need to finish, you just need to show up every day, pick one small area, a drawer, a shoe box, a cabinet shelf, set a timer for 15 minutes. When the alarm rings, stop and rest. What isn't finished can wait for tomorrow. 15 minutes won't exhaust you, but it will help you build a habit like drinking a glass of warm water in the morning or opening the window to let sunlight in. Margaret said in the beginning. She just opened one drawer. She pulled out some old papers, a few faded greeting cards, some notebooks that had no more space to write. Then she stopped right at 15 minutes, no pressure, no rush. A week later, that drawer was clean and light. A month later, her desk was clear and bright, and slowly that lightness began to spread into her bedroom, her living room, in her kitchen. You can start this evening, just 15 minutes, open one drawer, look inside, and ask, what in here have I not needed for a long time? You don't have to do it all, you just have to begin. Have you ever tried tidying up a little bit each day, instead of waiting for the weekend and giving up halfway? Share your experience below, or let us know what drawer you might start with today. There's a kind of item that doesn't physically take up much space, but feels heavy. Not heavy, but in guilt. A piece of fabric you meant to sew into a dress for your granddaughter, a sewing machine you plan to use after retirement, a photo album you meant to fill out page by page, a letter from an old friend you never replied to. Margaret called it her guilt corner, a space filled with things she once promised herself she'd do, but never did. Margaret's tip and dictate: clean the guilt corner by forgiving yourself for every item. Ask, am I keeping this because I want to finish it, or just to avoid the feeling of not finishing? If all it brings up is the ache of being unfinished, let it go and forgive yourself. Margaret had a knitting box. She once thought she'd knit scarf for the grandkids, just like her mother used to knit for her. But the truth was her eyes had weakened, her fingers had stiffened, and those balls of yarn had sat untouched for 10 years. One afternoon, she opened the lid, laid each ski out on the floor, ran her fingers softly across the threads, and then she said, Mom, I'm sorry I couldn't do what you did, but I still love what you taught me. She wrapped all the yarn in a white cloth and donated it to the local senior women's group. Do you have? What item do you feel the most guilt about? And if today you chose to forgive yourself, where would you begin? 2 days later, the 3-bedroom house, once packed with furniture, papers, photos, had fallen quiet, but not empty. Peaceful. Margaret walked from room to room, her fingers brushing the corners that had now been cleared. The walls no longer held pictures, the cabinets were no longer full, and the kitchen held just a kettle, a few bowls, and a small pot of herbs by the window. She didn't cry, she wasn't overwhelmed, she just smiled, a quiet smile, the kind only someone who's lived long enough will understand. I've held on long enough, now I get to live again. Lighter. Then she stepped out onto the porch, sat in her chair, sipped a warm cup of tea. Next to her was a small bag, just enough for the next chapter. Not much, only what made her feel alive. It was only after the house was clear that she realized the space we clear on the outside reflects what we've cleared within. None of us goes through life without carrying the old, but the ones who find peace are the ones who are willing to sort through it all. If today you walked out of your own home and could only take what truly mattered, what would you bring? Share below, and together let's reflect what is worth keeping and what is ready to go. Thank you for walking this journey with Margaret and with yourself through these 7 real, honest, and healing decluttering tips. I'm not Margaret, but I've been like her, standing in the middle of my own home, feeling small beneath the weight of old things and old memories. I used to think I had to hold on to everything so I wouldn't lose any part of my life, but then watching Margaret declutter, seeing how she touched each item, hearing how she said thank you, and then moved forward, I finally understood letting go isn't losing. Letting go makes space for something new to come in. And if you even just once saw yourself in Margaret's story, I hope you know this: you're not alone. You deserve a new chapter, one that's lighter, simpler, and truly yours. I'm Frank from Senior Life Reset. If this journey has helped you and you'd like to walk more of it with me, please consider subscribing. I'm truly grateful you're here. I appreciate your presence, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Thank you for staying until the very last word. What part of Margaret's journey touched your heart the most? Leave a comment below, because sometimes one simple line can reach someone who needs it.